Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Forum for Global Studies, I welcome you all to our special podcast session entitled The Role of Energy Security in an Evolving Global Landscape. I am Don McLean Gill, Director of Research at FGS. Now, our session today seeks to uncover the importance of energy amid the rapidly shifting geopolitical landscape. The need to emphasize on the challenges and the ways forward is crucial to further our understanding and to make sense of what is happening in the world today. Now, with this in mind, there is no one better to further our understanding on this topic than Dr. Gal Luft himself. Dr. Luft is co-director of the Institute for the Analysis of Global Security, a Washington-based think tank focused on energy, security, and economic trends. He's also a professor at the Austin Technical University in Turkey. Dr. Luft is also a senior advisor to the United States Energy Security Council, a cabinet-level extra-governmental advisory committee. He specializes in geopolitics, geoeconomics, energy security, the Middle East, and US-China relations. Now, Newsweek magazine called him a tireless and independent advocate of energy security. Esquire magazine included him in its list of America's best and brightest. Dr. Luft has also published numerous studies and articles in various newspapers and publications. Dr. Luft, it is a true pleasure to have you here, and we thank you for accepting our humble invitation to discuss a very important topic today. Thank you so much, sir.
It's my pleasure.
Now, if we may begin with the discussion. Now, as of 2021, at least a quarter of the world's liquid hydrocarbons are consumed by China, India, Japan, and South Korea. In the next 20 years, around 85% of the growth in energy consumption will be coming directly from what we call as the Indo-Pacific region. What are your thoughts, sir, on energy being called the defining factor of the 21st century geopolitics?
I think that we first want to realize that when we talk about energy, there are two types of energy. Actually, there are three types of energy. One of them is food, which will not include in this discussion. It's a very important part of energy because that's what keeps us alive. But luckily, most of the energy that goes into our food comes from renewable sources, from the sun, from water, etc. But the two types of energy that are often being confused is the transportation energy, which underlies global commerce. And this sector, which is cars, trucks, ships, planes, is almost entirely beholden to oil. 95% of our global transportation energy comes from oil. The other part of the energy story is electricity. And in electricity, oil plays almost no role. We barely generate any electricity from oil. Electricity is about coal, it's about nuclear, it's about solar, it's about gas, but not oil. So when we talk about the geopolitics of energy, the first thing you have to ask, what energy? Because if you are in the oil story, of course you go where the oil is. You go to the Middle East, you go to Russia, those are the North America, those are the places where the major oil reserves are known to exist. When you talk about electricity, the geopolitics looks quite different. Although there is coexistence of oil and gas in many places, but when you talk about electricity, coal plays a very important role, and it can be found in countries like Australia, Indonesia, Russia, Ukraine, etc. So, you know, it's a much more diversified source of energy, even though it is being vilified now, and many people don't like to talk about coal, but it's still not, let us not forget that it still produces almost a third of our electricity worldwide. So it's still a very important source of energy. And the geopolitics will always revolve around resources, because we are, 7 going to 8 billion people, and we all want to be connected to electricity supply and to own a car. And the funny thing is, we also add, every few years, we add a new source of demand. Just think about when you invent something called Bitcoin, all of a sudden you invented a new country. Bitcoin today consumes more energy just to mine the Bitcoin than the entire consumption of Norway or UAE. So and if you add to this our internet backbone, and every time that you do a Google search, there is energy involved in this. Every time you post a picture on Instagram, you consume energy. Every time you want to download a movie from Netflix, you consume energy. So and these are energy source of demand that did not exist, let's say 10 years ago. So our demand is growing, our needs are growing, and we're still going to the very same places where those energy sources exist. So of course, it will be a lot of geopolitical challenges as we see now. But those challenges not only have to do with demand and supply. We have to remember that energy security is not only about the availability of the resource, but it's also about the affordability. In other words, you can have all the energy in the world, but if it's too expensive for people to buy, then you don't have energy security. So we have to look at two sides of this equation, both availability and affordability. And we may see that even though the supply of energy is okay, the price is high, and people pay more for their electricity, say, and then they have to address the difficulties in supplying their daily needs. That's more or less what we see now in Europe, when all of a sudden energy prices have increased. And it's an ongoing story. But I would not say that it's a very unique story, because through the human experience, we've always had challenges when it comes to access to resources. There's always been competition. And the secret is just to learn how to manage those contradicting supply and demand and competition over resource in a peaceful way, without resorting to wars. I'm saying it because what is it? 80 years ago, this December in 1941, we had the attack on Pearl Harbor, and the reason that Japan decided to attack Pearl Harbor was because there was an oil embargo by the United States on Japan, and that sort of triggered a certain decision making that the Japanese regretted at the end of the day. But I'm just saying that we have to be very careful with how we handle energy, because countries, when they are with their back against the wall and they cannot supply basic needs to their countries, they tend to resort to violence, and that's something we want to prevent.
Thank you so much, Dr. Luft, for mapping out, of course, a conceptual understanding of energy security, and of course, make us understand that we have to take it beyond face value and to understand the deepening and, of course, the broadening of the concept, and of course, its implications and application to real-world politics or international politics. Now, to the second question, sir, when we talk about energy security, now the first region that comes into mind is usually the Middle East. Rightfully so, around 79.4% of the world's proven oil reserves are located in OPEC member countries, with the bulk of them in the Middle East. And this amounts to an estimate of at least 64.5% of the OPEC total. Now, given the instability and the exacerbating security concerns in the region, what measures can energy importing states take to safeguard their energy interests amid the tumultuous conditions in the region, particularly among the top energy exporting states?
Well, first of all, you're right that when we talk about oil, this is where most of the proven reserves are. And I'm saying proven reserves because it doesn't mean that there are no other reserves in other places. And as we know, the more you look and the more you survey, the more you find. So, and also the definition of oil is expanding. 10 years ago or 20 years ago, we did not talk about shale oil. Now that's part of the energy equation. We did not talk about the Canadian oil sands. Now it's, so, you know, the definition of oil is also expanding. But it's absolutely right that the Middle East is for now, is the main player. But let me break a myth here. Despite of the problems that the region generates, if I look at it really in a very objective way, the Middle East has surprised me for its actual stability. Not that the region is stable, but as a supplier, if we look over the past 50 years, half-century record of, we've seen a lot of turmoil in the Middle East. We've seen wars, we've seen civil wars, revolutions, but overall, with very few exceptions, the region has been pretty reliable in supplying us with oil. Just to give you an example, over the past 10 years, there have been several civil wars after the Arab Spring in Libya, in Yemen, in Syria, instability in Iraq, but overall, it did not really affect the price of oil so much. You know, I remember that in September of 2019, there was a major drone attack against Abqaiq oil processing facility in Saudi Arabia. And we all thought that that would have a huge impact on the price of oil. It didn't really. And the reason is because the countries that where the reserves are, the major reserve holders, are heavily dependent on oil revenues. Without oil revenues, they cannot survive. I'm talking about Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, UAE, Qatar when it comes to natural gas more. But you know, these countries must present themselves as reliable suppliers. They must be able to, the world is relying on those countries, and they know that they cannot screw up, because if they will, the world will immediately shift to look for resources in other places, and they will end up being the losers. So overall, I would say that they have done a pretty good job in presenting themselves as reliable suppliers. That said, I think that, and you asked what can the world do to the importers can do. I think that the most important thing on the agenda now is to do two things. First of all, to do everything we can to rebuild and reconstruct the war-torn countries of the Middle East, which have been going through a very difficult decade, and now are gradually emerging from their civil wars. Next month, for example, after 10 years since the death of Gaddafi, there will be hopefully elections in Libya. Libya is a very important part of the energy picture, and you know, if there is a new government there and investments can come in and reconstruction can begin, then we will have 2, 3, maybe more extra million barrels a day of oil in the market. The same is true for Yemen, and the same is true for Iraq, which had its elections last month. So I think that sooner we embark on this, what I call the Middle East Reconstruction Initiative, something akin to the Marshall Plan reconstruction of Europe after the Second World War, the sooner we can see the energy flowing out of these countries. The second thing that I think is very important is for those countries in the Middle East that are still using oil to generate electricity. And unfortunately, in the Middle East, we still see this. Outside of Middle East, it's almost unheard of. But in the Middle East, we still see a lot of electricity generated from oil. It's a very, very big waste of resources because many of those countries have other potential sources like solar, like natural gas, that they can generate electricity and therefore have more oil to export to the rest of the world. So these are the two things I think that are very important for the importer community to do, to come together and do this energy transition in the Middle East, as well as the reconstruction of the region, particularly those countries that are important to the energy supply story.
Thank you for that, Dr. Luft, and of course for highlighting, of course, the objective assessment of the situation in the Middle East as far as exporting is concerned, and you have comprehensively highlighted the continuous progress and, in fact, the development of the efficiency and effectivity of oil exportation, of energy exports throughout the world. And this, I believe, should be a point for many to consider and to understand, given, of course, the shifts in the global geopolitical landscape. Now, in your outstanding and comprehensive chapter on energy security and climate, sir, it was highlighted, interestingly, that energy security and greenhouse gas reduction have several complementaries, but also contain a lot of trade-offs. Now, interestingly, it was also mentioned that it is not self-evident that climate change will necessarily lead to energy insecurity or vice versa. Could you please expound on this, sir, and relate it, of course, to the concept of energy security, perhaps even taking into mind the recent COP26 as well?
Yes, it's a very timely question because we're just coming out of COP26 and everybody is telling very ambitious stories about what they're going to do in 2060 or 2070, many, many years after they will not be with us on this planet. So I'm just, I think we have to dispel some myth around the relations between energy security and climate change. So if we, again, resort to the definition of energy security, as I said before, it's about affordability and availability. Climate policies do not always lend themselves to energy security. Because if you replace cheap energy with more expensive energy, just because it's cleaner, okay, you have maybe a benefit for the environment, for the climate, but you are forcing people to pay more for the energy. So there is an impact on affordability. Similarly, for example, if you are talking about availability or reliability of energy, the more you move from what we call base load power source of energy, those are the sources of power that you can create power 24 hours a day, like with coal and natural gas and nuclear. These are stable sources of power. When you replace those stable sources of power with sources like wind and solar, which are intermittent because the sun doesn't shine 24 hours a day and the wind doesn't blow 24 hours a day, okay, so they're not as stable, then you could see supply disruptions. And just if you want to ask yourself what would have happened in Texas, last winter when there was a cold spell and all of a sudden the power was down. If you had less reliable source of energy, you could see a real catastrophe there. So it's very important not to fall into the rhetoric that we often hear from climate activists and also, unfortunately, from political leaders that try to paint everything in very rosy colors, that the energy transition will be all good, it will create millions and millions of jobs, and it will increase our prosperity, and it will do all these magic things, and will usher us to Neverland. This is not necessarily the truth. Okay, we have to be. I think one of the problems that we have in this climate discussion, particularly watching the conversation COP26, is that our leaders are not telling us the truth. And that's a big problem if you don't understand the ABC of energy. So you can begin to believe various lies and fabrications that are being handed to us, spoonfuls of them every day through our media and other sources. So, of course, climate policies will bring various benefits, particularly when you move from polluting sources of energy to non-polluting source of energy. And I may say polluting also, that's another complex word, because a lot of the discussion about pollution is being confused with CO2. Now, CO2 is not a pollutant. It's a greenhouse gas. It may or may not have an impact on the future of our planet, but it's not something that kills you. If you have more CO2 in the room, you don't die or get sick from it, right? In fact, CO2 is what makes our food. CO2 is life. It's very different from those pollutants that really make us sick when we emit them, like the sulfur, like the SOx and the NOx and the mercury, and those are real pollutants. They are bad, okay? They are bad for us, bad for our health, and we need to knock them out. Yes, climate policies are on the table, but they're not only going to create solutions, they're also going to create problems. And we have to understand that those problems will have to be managed. And I think that what we've seen recently with the supply disruptions in India and in China and in Europe and also in North America should give us all a pause and make us understand that sometimes if you run too fast, you can hit speed bumps, and then it hurts. And I think that in our sort of rush to this this vision of net zero, we will have a lot of painful reminders that if we go too fast, we will face a lot of economic problems. And I urge all of the countries to look very seriously into how they manage this transition and realize that sustainability needs to be sustainable, because if not, then it will not happen.
Absolutely well said, Dr. Luft. And of course, we're pointing out the intricate and complex relationship between energy security and climate change. And of course, the myth busting is definitely very helpful for us to effectively understand this complex relationship between the two concepts. Now, this all boils down to our last question, sir. Now, what is the way forward? Given the extremely volatile situation amid the uncertainty taking place in international politics, how can a sustainable outcome be achieved, given the demand for energy will only increase as the years go by?
First of all, I think we need to understand that when the demand of energy increases, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Because what it means that we are growing, it means that we are getting healthier, it means that we prosper. I'll be actually more worried if I see that the demand for energy is receding, because to me it will indicate that humanity is essentially collapsing, that the economy is not growing, that we are not The population is collapsing in some parts of the world. So I think that we have to sort of get from this away from this mindset. If we need more of something, it's a problem. Yes, I think we need to use resources efficiently. There's no doubt about that. It's very important to increase efficiency. It's very important to use our precious resources in the most responsible way. But let's not make energy and energy sources, even fossil fuels, let's not make them the enemy. I was just, I gave a speech in China recently, and I gave my Chinese audience a data point that may even be true for India, that over the past 50 years, the life expectancy of the average Chinese at birth essentially doubled. And the Chinese economy grew 150%, in over, sorry, 150 times in just half a century. So you'd think that fossil fuels had something to do with that, right? It didn't happen just from breathing air. It happened because they had access to affordable energy, and that gave them access to electricity, that gave them access to heating and cooling, and ability to drink clean water, and ability to build hospitals where child mortality dropped as a result. So I think we have to be very careful not to vilify energy and fossil fuels just because we have some people telling us that these sources of energy are going to bring to the end of the world, or the end of the extinction of humanity, and all these apocalyptic visions. In my view, this kind of rhetoric smells to me like a very sinister plan to crush the development of the developing countries and leave them behind in their poverty after the rich countries have served themselves a gluttony of energy for 150 years. And now they're turning out to the poor people of the world and are telling them, sorry, guys, you cannot join the party, you cannot grow. To me, that is the closest thing to what I call a new form of imperialism. And I think we have to be very, very, to aggressively push against this, and not to accept those dictates on the ground of all kind of scare tactics, that if we don't do this and this, we will bring to the end of humanity. You know, hundreds of years ago, we had you know, scientists going to prison and to home arrest just because they expressed their views. I think we have to have a very different conversation about energy, one that is devoid of intimidation and marginalization, and we have to discuss it in a very factual manner. And you know, I would say that most of the leaders that came to Glasgow and presented their plans, or their ambitions, sorry, to get to zero emissions by 2050 or 2060 or 2070 in the case of India, do not have any clue how to get there. A lot of it is based on experimental technologies and wishful thinking, but they have no problem throwing all these numbers, even though they don't know how to get there. So to me, growth is important. If we are in the business of preventing growth, preventing energy consumption, then we need to, that's a very anti-human thinking. Because if you don't want people to use energy, then you should ban vitamins, because vitamins make you healthier, and if you're healthy, you live a longer life and consume more energy. I think we have to ban education too, because okay, if the more educated you are, the richer you get, and then you obviously waste more energy. So this is a fundamentally anti-human worldview that tells us that we have to use less energy and therefore be poor and live a shorter life. We should reject this kind of thinking. and I don't want any of what I say to be misconstrued as sort of climate denialism or anti-environmental. This is not the case. This is not how I see the world. I'm an economist. As an economist, I look at what is the best way to utilize our resources and to supply people the basic needs for their existence. And I think that the most important thing we need to do is to understand that if we are to solve global problems, and it doesn't matter if it's climate change or health issues or world peace issues, we need to prosper. Prosperity is the most important thing. I call it prosperity first, like America first, prosperity first. Why? Because poor countries, there's very little that they can do to solve global problems. They're poor. They need to talk about food, about shelter, about basic things. They don't have the resources to address global problems. So if we want more and more countries to be in the mindset of how we solve global problems, we want them to be richer rather than poorer. And unfortunately, the developing world is not being well represented in the global discussions because a lot of the leaders of the developing world try to curry favor with the West, with rich countries, because they think that will endear them to those leaders. It won't. If you're a leader of a developing country, your main responsibility is to your people and to ensure their needs so that one day, hopefully, they can be like the rest of the rich countries. And that's why we need a whole different type of conversation that is based on facts, on what we can achieve with the technology that we have today, with open mind, and also to realize that humanity is adaptable. And we've had a lot of natural disasters. The history of humanity is littered with stories about droughts and fires and floods and everything. But somehow we've been able not only to survive, but also to thrive. And in fact, living in the 21st century is a much better deal than living in the 16th or 14th century, right? We all are getting a much better life when we live. So not only that we've been able to survive as a species, we've been able to increase our life expectancy and to live a better life. And to a very large extent, this is happening because we have affordable energy. And I hope that we don't make the mistake that will take this opportunity from us for the coming generations.
Rightfully said, Dr. Luft, and you have definitely highlighted very, very important and critical points that are supposed to be and definitely should be the main foundations for further discussions and conversations, particularly on energy security and the future of the world. And the conversation that we had today, sir, and of course with your insights, all of these, all the knowledge we have garnered in this particular session is significantly very crucial for everyone, and of course not only for academics but every individual living in this planet. A change of mindset is definitely needed. So with that, we thank you, Dr. Luft, and on that note, I wish to hand over the virtual floor to FGS, the founder, Dr. Sandeep Tripathi, to give the closing remarks.
Thank you, Don, for this wonderful moderation of this energy session. And I'm very thankful, first of all, for a kind acceptation and invitation to accepted by the Professor Dr. Luft. And today's session was highly insightful. It was highly lucid analysis. As an energy expert, a little bit, not so high. So I have been following you, sir, so many in so many literature. And today I got your point here in this session. And your analysis and your observation that is highly insightful for scholars who have interest, who have want to do something about the energy security in the global realm, as well as the policy practitioners, policy makers, those who are going to formulate the policy for energy security. And your analysis is based on highly pragmatic. When you say that, yes, we prefer growth, we prefer prosperity, and especially for the developing countries, those who are willing to develop. So for that, we need to adopt a very pragmatic and very nuanced approach to safe economy, to prosper economy, and to safe climate. That is not one way that, and another point that you highlighted, sir, that the renewable energy, that everyone talking about the renewable energy, but yes, there is also risk. Like if we have told sunlight, so there is no possibility of the solar energy. So wind, solar, and hydro, it also natural gift. It might not be have a natural gift for all countries, but yes, if we have a coal, we have a natural gas, if we have oil, so we could preserve it and we could prosper through these natural resources. Sure, thank you so much, sir. Your insightful lecture, and I believe that this FGS platform, given your lecture, will be highly insightful for us, as well as for policymakers across the India, as well as across the globe. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
My